guys, welcome back to the channel. I am in Georgetown, South Carolina, and down this lonesome road is this small, quaint country church called Oak Grove United Methodist Church. And attached to the church is the cemetery, a beautiful old cemetery with a wrought iron gate, and it says Oak Grove above it. And buried inside here are 3 graves of 3 victims: Mr. Dennis Bellamy, Diane Neely, his sister, and a half-sibling, John Knight, who was 15 years old. And they were victims of a serial killer named Donald Wee Gaskins. Some say he was the meanest man in America. Let's talk about this. Pee Wee was born on March 13th, 1933, and he was born in a small community called Prospect, South Carolina. His mother was unwed. Her name was Elia Parrott, and she prostituted herself out often. And one of the men was Henry Gaskins. That was supposed to be Pee Wee Gaskins' father. She also is reported to have rented Pee Wee out to Johns and any men that might want him. So he had a pretty awful childhood start. By the time that he was around 8 years old, he had pretty much stopped going to school. So he officially quit when he was around 12. And he started working in an auto garage and started working on cars, which he was pretty good at. He wasn't too bad mechanically wise. He learned how to do that. But he hooked up with 2 other boys. Their names were Danny Smith and Henry Marsh, and they called themselves the Trouble Trio. They were doing petty crimes together. They would steal candy and cigarettes from stores, and as they got older, with the help of Danny's father, they learned how to break into homes and steal things from there. And they done this for a while until they got up enough money that they could buy their own vehicle. So they got their own car, and that allowed them to drive to Columbia, South Carolina, where they could hook up with prostitutes. Now, all this progressed over a couple years, and they got bored with the prostitutes, and they wondered what it would be like to be with a virgin. With that thought in their mind, they ended up taking Henry Marsh's 13-year-old sister and luring her away with the promise they were going to take her to the movies or something like that. That isn't what they did, however. Instead, they assaulted this child. They kept her most of the day and put her through terrible torture. And then after they were done and they were going to take her back home, they threatened her to make sure she wouldn't tell anyone. But she did immediately tell her mother when she got home. In retaliation, instead of pressing charges against the boys, the men of the family physically beat them to a pulp. Now, it wasn't long after this that the other 2 boys, Danny and Henry, moved away, and that left Pee Wee alone on his own. Pee Wee did not quit doing what he had been doing. He continued to break into homes and steal. He broke into a home, and there was a young girl that was home that day, and she recognized Pee Wee. Well, she picked up a hatchet. He got the hatchet away, and he took the hatchet, and he knocked her upside the head. And when he did, he knocked her unconscious. Well, when she came to, she was able to identify that it was Pee Wee. And this is what got Pee Wee in the reform school. Now, the name of this reform school was the South Carolina Industrial School for White Boys. And he got sent there, and because of his small stature, he immediately became the one that the other boys picked on and assaulted. They assaulted him physically and sexually. He would run away from this reform school, but he would end up returning. And at one point, right before he's 18, he runs away and he meets a woman named Mary, and they get married. And he returns to the reform school and finishes out his time. So Pee Wee finishes reform school. Him and Mary, They get out and they move around a couple of places. He does a lot of different kinds of jobs. He does some mechanical stuff. He logs cypress wood out of swamps. Just different various jobs. And eventually they land on a tobacco farm and they start working there. They have a 3-bedroom house, and it's during this time that Pee-wee's first child, a daughter, is born. Well, Pee-wee hooks up with another man called Slick, and he had met Slick through reform school. Well, him and Slick started running an insurance fraud racket where they were burning down tobacco barns, and they were getting large sums of money for this. Well, Slick got arrested, but he didn't tell on Pee-wee. He didn't rat him out. And so Pee-wee and Mary got to remain on the farm. But the new owner had a daughter, and she tells Pee-wee, I know you were involved in that insurance fraud. I know you were burning those barns down. Well, he doesn't like what she says. So what does Pee-wee do? He takes a hammer and he knocks her in the head. This is where Pee-wee goes to prison. Pee-wee is sentenced to 5 years in the South Carolina State Penitentiary in Columbia for the charges. It's assault with a deadly weapon with intent to inflict bodily harm and or arson for setting the barn fires. Well, in court, he was sentenced to 5 years, but in court, he calls the judge a son of a bitch, so he got an additional year. So he got 6 years. Pee-wee was not in prison very long before he was sexually attacked by another prisoner. And this went on for several weeks till Pee-wee decided that he was going to stop it. And the way that he knew how to stop it was to become what they call a power man in prison. And the best way that he could figure that he could achieve this title was to attack the biggest, strongest man in prison, which was a man named Hazel Brazel. So Pee-wee attacks him one day and cuts his throat. Well, Pee-wee got solitary confinement for that and the charge of manslaughter. But when he got out, he was now considered a power man. Pee-wee did not remain in prison. He ended up escaping by sneaking out into a garbage truck. And he was on the run for a while. And during this time, he did a lot of different things. He worked for a carnival. He worked for a traveling preacher. He got married a few times. He got charged with interstate auto theft in Tennessee. He got sent to Atlanta, Georgia to do 3 years for that. So he went through a lot of different things, a lot of crazy twists and turns. But let's forward a few years and let's get to 1968, because 1968 was a pivotal year for Pee-wee. It was around this time when Pee-wee said he began to experience what he termed the troublesome feeling. And the troublesome feeling was a bothersome pain. And it started in his groin, it would go up his spine, it would end up in his head, and it was a migraine. And this was the feeling that pushed him away from his family and pushed him into a car and started driving up and down the coast between Myrtle Beach and Savannah, Georgia. And this is when he began what he called his coastal kills. The first person to fall victim to Donald Gaskins' troublesome feeling was a young blonde hitchhiker by the name of Angie. This was in September 1969. He picked her up in an area called Pawleys Island, South Carolina. He tortured this young woman. He brutalized her body with an 8-inch dagger, and when he was finished with her, he put her in the water and watched her sink. This was only the first victim. He stated that he repeated this at least 2 more times. So there was 3 victims total by Christmas of that year. Pee-wee would go on to say that he committed coastal kills about once every 6 weeks. And by his estimate, he committed throughout the years at least 80 or 90 coastal kills. It was around November 1970 that Pee-wee committed what he considered a serious murder. This was a murder of someone that he knew. And the first person that he said he killed that he knew was his niece, Janice, and her friend, Patricia. Pee-wee killed Janice Kirby, his 15-year-old niece, and her best friend, Patricia Alsbrook, who was a senior in high school and was 17 years old. The 2 girls were taken to Pee-wee's house where he assaulted them. And even though they fought back, hitting Pee-wee with a lamp, and they tried to run down the road and get away, he did manage to catch them and drag them back. He killed both the girls, and he buried his niece Janice behind a building. and he disposed of Patricia's body in a septic tank. When her body was eventually found years later, it was too difficult to determine the manner in which she was killed because of the decomposition. But the police were certain that it was her. One reason is because her high school class ring was found in the tank with the human remains. Pee Wee later expressed surprising regret for having killed Janice. Pee Wee would go on to kill many more people. They ranged in ages, in sex, and race. Some of his victims was a woman named Martha Dix, who went by the name Clyde. She was an African-American lesbian who joked that she was pregnant with Pee Wee's child. Well, Pee Wee did not like that. So he took acid that would have been used in photography development, and he used it to poison her Coca-Cola. And that's how he killed her. Her body was found in Sumter County 2 days after the trial of Silas Yates. Now, Silas Yates was a prosperous South Carolina farmer, and Gaskins was actually hired to kill Yates by Suzanne Kipper. He said that he karate chopped Silas in the throat, and that's how he killed him, but the coroner reported that Silas had been stabbed to death. 2 people that Pee Wee killed that stand out in my mind are Doreen Dempsey, who was 23 years old and 8 months pregnant, and her 2-year-old child, Robin. What I have read was that Doreen had approached Pee Wee either asking for shelter or a ride to the bus station. And instead of doing this for her, he pushed her into a pond and held her down till she drowned. And then Robin, he sodomized and killed and drowned her as well. Now, the baby, the 2-year-old, her head was crushed, her skull was, and he swore he didn't do that it must have happened when she was in the trunk of the car. Now, in January 1975, an important occurrence happened. Pee Wee got a roommate, and his roommate was a man named Walter Neely. Walter Neely was the estranged husband of Diane Neely. Diane Neely had a friend named Avery Howard. Now, Diane was 29 years old and Howard was 35 from North Charleston. And allegedly, they were going to go to the authorities, to the police, and tell that Gaskins was connected to a statutory rape. This is why Gaskins killed Diane Neely and Avery Howard. Diane Neely was the sister to Dennis Bellamy, and they were both half-siblings to John Knight, who was 15 years old. Dennis Bellamy and John Knight stopped by Gaskins' house around October 1975. They'd been looking since April for their sister, and not knowing that Gaskins had murdered her and knew exactly where she was buried. Gaskins took Dennis Bellamy and Johnny Knight into the woods and shot them in the head and buried them in the same grave. Now, it's quoted in the state paper from 1991 that this is what Gaskins said. As to Dennis Bellamy, I did kill him, and I'm sorry for it today, and if I had to go over it again, I think I would jump out the truck and run to not have done it. I should have done it that night, but didn't. As to Avery Leroy Howard and Diane Bellamy Neely, I should have told them to go right ahead and tell the law whatever they wanted to, and if they did, it would make them accessories to the crime. But I wasn't thinking straight in those days, and I am now. I read conflicting stories about how Gaskins killed Dennis Bellamy and Johnny Knight. He didn't deny having killed Dennis Bellamy, and he didn't deny having killed Johnny Knight, but for different reasons. He made up a story that he was fighting for self-defense against Dennis Bellamy, and that's when the gun went off and accidentally shot Johnny Knight. He has expressed some regret in previous writings where he said that he didn't want to kill Johnny Knight, but he had to because he was with his brother, and that's why he had to kill him. So what got Gaskins caught? Well, it was the murder of a young girl called Kim Gaskins. Kim Gaskins was 13 years old. Her mother was dead, and her father had served time in prison. She was in 5th grade with students much younger than herself at Chicora Elementary School. And she had a teacher whose name was Mrs. Mary Ann Griffin. Miss Mary Ann Griffin gave her an assignment, and they were supposed to write an essay called The Person I Most Admire. And who does Kim choose? Well, Kim chose the 19-year-old wife of Wee Gaskins, Donna Gaskins. She was acting as a mother figure to Kim, and Kim looked up to her. And sometimes on the weekends, Kim would go with Pee Wee and his wife, Donna, to these vacations, to these weekend trips to Williamsburg County. Well, one weekend, Gaskin returns, and he states that he dropped Kim off on the street they lived on to her father, but he didn't bring Kim back with him. The reason Pee Wee did not bring Kim back is because he had left her in the trailer, and he had left her restrained, and he would go up there and assault her sexually, and then he would bring his friends up there and let them sexually assault her. When the police did finally start looking for Kim Gaskins, they discovered some of her clothing in Pee Wee's trailer, and Walter Neely lived there, so they investigated him as well. And the first thing that Walter Neely did was tell them about Pee Wee Gaskins. And what the sheriff has quoted as saying is that there were people who were disappearing, and the common thread between all these people was Donald Henry Gaskins Jr., a.k.a. Pee Wee. It was on the morning of December the 4th, 1975, that Walter Neely led detectives out to Prospect, South Carolina, and walked around the wooded area near a cornfield, and that's where the graves were discovered. By the end of that day, 3 bodies would be found. 2 of those victims were Dennis Bellamy and John Knight, his half-brother. Dennis and John's bodies were found in a grave together, and Avery Howard and Diane Bellamy were found in a grave together. The cause of death for Dennis Bellamy and John Henry Knight were they were shot with a .32 caliber gun. And Diane Neely was stabbed to death in the chest and shot under the chin. And Avery Howard was stabbed to death. When Donald Henry Gaskins Jr., Pee Wee, was brought to trial for Dennis Bellamy's murder, he did get the death sentence. But with court systems, the death sentence ended up being overturned as capital punishment was overturned by the Supreme Court. But that's not the end of the story for Pee Wee. Pee Wee was in prison serving life sentences for the murders that he had committed, and he was hired by a man named Como. Apparently, there was a prisoner in jail on death row named Rudolph Tyner, and he had killed a couple down in South Carolina who owned a little grocery store, and their son hired Pee Wee to kill him because it was taking too long for him to be killed on death row. So Pee Wee said, "Send me some dynamite and I'll make it happen," and that's what he done. And he killed Rudolph Tyner by a handmade radio that he told Rudolph if he put it next to his ear, they would be able to talk. And so that's what he done, and he was sitting on the toilet, and Pee Wee blew his head off. And that is when Pee Wee got the death sentence, and that's when Pee Wee was executed in the electric chair. It was because of Rudolph Tyner's murder. Okay, guys, this is at the end of the video. I hope you hung in there and listened to all of it. I thank you for watching, and please like the video and subscribe and share if you can. I appreciate all of it, and I want you guys to always keep seeking. And I'm going to leave you with a video of the final resting places for Miss Diane Bellamy, her brother Dennis Bellamy, and their half-sibling John Knight. Look how many. Thank you, guys. Bye. Look at that. And if you see Dennis and you see Diane, those were her children, and they were victims of Pee Wee Gaskins. And as you can see, the graves here beside beside her. This one right here is Diane's. Someone's placed flowers. There's Diane. They buried her April 10th, 1975. And Dennis, October 10th, 1975. And then John, October 10th, 1975. Same day.